Donald Trump has selected his running mate, and he's no stranger to Canada. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance has an impressive resume. He's a former U.S. Marine, and he's also a best-selling author. But he also has said some things notable to us Northerners. The senator has expressed support for the Freedom Convoy, for crypto, and for Canadian churches, which have been burned down by the dozens without a peep from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Now, it seems strange and a little sad that a senator south of the border has a better pulse on the Canadian everyman than the politicians elected to represent us. But isn't that increasingly the case under the Trudeau Liberals? They don't care about us, and they haven't pretended to for a while now. So while Justin Trudeau wastes our defense budget on tampons for men, it brings me some relief to know that the man most likely to be the next vice president of the most powerful nation on earth has at least some sympathy for the Canadian conservative plight. I'm Rachel Parker, and you're watching Rachel and the Republic. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Rachel and the Republic. We are going to take a look at the senator from Ohio who has just been named Donald Trump's running mate on his 2024 presidential ticket. Now, you might think I'm being a little dramatic with these comparisons here, but I think as we go through today's show, you'll see just how correct I am in saying that this is somebody who cares more about Canadian conservatives than our own elected politicians. And there's also a few things that we can learn from him here in Canada. One of the most interesting things about JD is that he is a masterclass at dealing with the media. He would perhaps even put federal conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to shame. We all remember that infamous clip of Pierre embarrassing the reporter while munching on an apple. But don't take it from me. Listen to JD himself. Here he is talking to the mainstream media about Donald Trump and his conviction cases. Let's take a look at this next clip.
Interested in being the running mate of a convicted felon?
Well, Wolf, the entire purpose of this trial was to allow the media and the Democrats to say exactly that. This is never about justice. This is about plastering convicted felon all over the airwaves, when in reality, the only thing that Donald Trump is guilty of is being in the courtroom of a political sham trial. You cannot say that this trial was anything more than politics masquerading as justice. And yes, I will help Donald Trump. I will help Donald Trump however I think that I can, Wolf, because if we allow this to happen, it's so much bigger and so much more troubling than Donald Trump. If we allow this standard that you can throw your political opponents in jail because they're doing better than you in an election, it will be the end of this country as we know it.
As I said, an absolute masterclass in how to deal with the dishonest media. And you see there that is CNN, one of the worst culprits of lying to the American public. What we saw there was J.D. Vance. He wasn't being apologetic for the sham trial. He wasn't trying to talk his way out of things, but he was debunking the claim at its base. He was saying that this was not a real trial. And the only thing that Trump himself was guilty of was even being a part of the sham trial. Now, that was one of many trials we know that in the United States, they threw everything in the book that they had at Donald Trump, legally speaking, well, and then eventually the assassination attempt, which of course we'll get to try to take down the former president, who has of course now been confirmed as the Republican presidential nominee. He was confirmed on Monday at the Republican National Convention. And I think that is why he was picked as Trump's running mate, because JD knows how to undress the media and to break down their lies clearly and succinctly. And that is going to be important moving forward. We're seeing a big change in how politicians approach the media. For so long, they've been so apologetic. Here in Canada, we've seen that. Andrew Scheer, Aaron O'Toole, very apologetic with the Canadian media. Now we've seen something new and refreshing with Pierre Poilievre, where he does not apologize for being conservative. He is conservative unabashedly, and he starts by debunking the media's claims when they approach him with something that he doesn't believe in. For too long, we've seen conservatives go along with the lies. Now, let's start by taking a look at one of JD's most interesting comments on a situation unfolding in Canada. Listen, I don't think we want to go back to this fateful time in Canadian history, but it is important for the context of today's show. So we're going to travel back in time to the COVID-19 pandemic. You likely remember those fateful days, and I want to start by setting the scene for you so you remember just how bad things got in Canada during February 2022. Take a look at this next clip.
Keep going. Sideways, pull sideways. All right.
Now, I suspect that most of you have never seen that clip before. It was actually shot by me. I was a little known journalist working in the mainstream media up in Ottawa at the time, working for an outlet called iPolitics, which was a subsidiary of the Toronto Star. Don't come for me, you guys. I still believe that I did some good work while I was there in trying to uncover some of the lies. But ultimately, the reason that I left the mainstream media and that I now work for True North, for those of you who aren't familiar with my story, is that it just became impossible to report on the truth. And I was so tired of being censored at my own workplace. And often things were edited into my work later on that I had not agreed to, which is just immoral on a base level to write something under a writer's name, under an author's byline that they never signed off on. And so for reasons like that, I wasn't pushed out. In a way I wasn't fired. I did quit, but I was really pushed out. There wasn't space for me in that ecosystem. So I took that clip while I was still working for the mainstream media. You can tell what's going on there. We are on Parliament Hill. You can see the center block and the west block behind me in that shot. And you can see police forcing protesters back. It was one of the most emotional things that I've ever covered in my life, probably seconded now by the attempted assassination of Donald Trump on Saturday. And what was going on in that clip was that there was a tent structure on the street. And so we were all walking backwards because we were looking at the police. We wanted to make sure we knew where they were so we didn't accidentally get hit with a baton or trampled by them as they walked. And all of a sudden, a bunch of us looked behind us and we realized that the street was blocked by this tent structure that had hay bales on either side of it. And so we noticed it too late. The hay bales were pretty much upon us. And as we turned to get over them, people started tripping and falling on each other. And I was caught underneath a group of people. I fell into that hay bale. Bodies started falling on top of me, which is a very scary thing for anyone to experience. I'm also extremely claustrophobic and I began panicking. I really thought this something really bad was going to happen, but there were luckily protesters on the other side of the structure that began just grabbing us and pulling us out. So obviously we were okay in the end, but it was a very frightful moment. And I think looking at that clip, it just reminds me of the intense raw emotion that we saw during the Freedom Convoy and just really the sickness of our federal government played out in that scene where you have civilians who are so desperate to be heard by their federal government that they drive up to the Capitol and they park themselves on the street of the Capitol and they sleep in their trucks and in their cars for weeks on end so that their federal government will take them seriously. And this is how our federal government responded, was with police pushing people, walking over them and arresting those who didn't move out of their way. Now, you and I saw that clip and we know what went on there was wrong. And a federal judge has even agreed that what was wrong. They said that the Trudeau government's invocation of the Federal Emergencies Act to remove protesters was unconstitutional and infringed on our rights as Canadians. We know that the Trudeau Liberals and Justin Trudeau, he doesn't care and he never will. But interestingly, even J.D. Vance, not even yet elected a senator at the time, took notice of this happening in Ottawa. And he wrote on X, then Twitter at the time, this is a direct quote, "What's happening in Canada is a far greater assault on democracy than anything the left has whined about for the last few years. It could happen here if we don't elect people who defend our voters." I'm not even sure that Vance was aware at the time. Well, obviously, he wasn't aware of the incredible way that those words would kind of come back to haunt him when he talks about an assault on democracy. America experienced one of the most significant attacks on democracy in American political history on Saturday when gunman Thomas Crooks attempted to assassinate former US President and Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump. And of course, you guys, I'm sure, have seen the videos. He got so close. He got so close. I truly believe that it was an act of divine intervention. I believe that God is in control of all things and it was not Donald Trump's time to go. But I think if it wasn't without that, I think that that would have been very successful. And the reason we saw that attack on Donald Trump on Saturday, it follows years of dogmatic and violent rhetoric about Donald Trump from the managerial class in the United States. They hate Donald Trump. Tucker Carlson said this, and I think he put it perfectly, that Donald Trump is really an indictment of America's ruling and elite political class, because the ruling class in America, like the ruling class in Canada, hates the people. It hates the people that it was elected to serve. And Donald Trump loves the people. He loves the people. He doesn't, I think you and I both know this, he grew up very wealthy. He is very wealthy. He's certainly not doing this for the money. He's not doing this for the power. He was arguably, in many ways, more popular than he was before he was president. The managerial class, the media loved Donald Trump before he ran for president, and they all turned on him since. So certainly he has a lot less access to the high class life that he would have lived before he was president. Now he can't even go out to an event of his own without being shot at. So I think it's important that we don't fool ourselves and that we recognize that the managerial class that we talk about in the States that hate Donald Trump, we have those same people here in Canada. And who better to represent them than Chrystia Freeland, who I often very controversially say might even be more unlikable than Justin Trudeau. Don't come for me in the comments. I just want you to think about it for a minute. And just, she has been his best henchman. She has done everything that he has asked of her. We're now seeing some rumors in the media about how they might be looking to push her out as finance minister. And we're seeing a lot of people on the right and the left saying Justin Trudeau is a fake feminist. Honestly, I think that she's been a horrible finance minister, and I think she deserves to be pushed out as finance minister. So if she was removed, I think it would make sense. I don't even think this is an argument of Justin Trudeau being a fake feminist. I think this might actually be the one half decent thing that he would do. That being said, I'm sure he would replace her with someone even worse. But if you don't remember, and if you need some convincing that Chrystia Freeland is one of the worst and most anti-Canadian politicians we've ever seen in Canadian history, just maybe need a little reminder. Take a look at this next clip of her announcing that the Trudeau Liberals would be freezing the bank accounts of those involved in the Freedom Convoy.
As of today, a bank or other financial service provider will be able to immediately freeze or suspend an account without a court order.
Now, this should go down as one of the worst moments in Canadian history. I don't know if it will. I feel like the leftists probably are writing the history books. Maybe we should get someone on that soon. But even J.D. took notice of it at the time, writing on X, quote, "This is why crypto is taking off. The regime will cut off your access to banking if you have the wrong politics." He's of course right. Millions of Canadians are buying crypto every single day. I myself and my husband, we have experienced our bank assets being frozen with little notice. The CRA just gave notice to our bank that they were freezing our bank account, and it was frozen the next day. We had not received any notice in the mail about issues. We hadn't received any notice to our accountant. And we never got access to that bank account again, mostly because we didn't comply with the CRA and we weren't cooperative with them. But my husband is very active in politics, as am I. And this can happen to anyone. It's still happening to people after the Freedom Convoy. And I think that this is something that Canadians remember. And we saw that this week on, I believe it was Monday, Justin Trudeau put an announcement out on Twitter saying, check your bank account. There's exciting news about a carbon tax rebate in there. And every single comment underneath that video was, why are you freezing my account again? Anytime the Liberal government tells me to check my bank account, I have a feeling that it's frozen. I feel fear. So Canadian people haven't forgotten about this. And I don't think they ever will. And I don't think they ever should. When we're talking about JD, there's a couple other interesting things that he's done. He has noticed the phenomenon of Canadian churches being burned down. Now, this is something that True North has really honed the beat on. My colleague Cosmin Georgia has covered this so closely. He has a map of all the churches in Canada that have been burned down. Every time we find out about a new one, he adds it to his map. He's really been covering this beat so well. If you haven't seen his report, I highly recommend you go check it out. The reason these churches started being burned down was after we heard that there were mass graves of residential school children. Now, we know now that no graves have actually been found. It's just been rocks that they found. But that hasn't stopped masses of Canadian churches being burned down, over 100 Canadian churches being burned down, to no word from our ruling officials or from the Trudeau Liberals. But that didn't stop J.D. Vance from taking notice of it. He wrote on X, "What the hell is happening in Canada?" to the news of all the churches that have been vandalized. And it is a very good question. What the hell is happening in Canada? Like I said, we know that they have not found mass graves at any of the sites where they have claimed that there was mass graves from residential school children. But that news hasn't made it out publicly. That's been quietly slipped through. We've reported on it at True North, but you won't hear it in the mainstream media. If you don't believe me, if you don't take me at my word that JD is probably going to be good for Canadian conservatives and that he understands our plight more than anyone else, well, he even got a pass from Canada's ambassador to the US. Kirsten Hillman appears to be a fan of the pick because of Vance's knowledge of the Canada US trade relationship. Here's her talking on CTV News about the pick this week. Take a listen.
Yeah, I've met him a couple of times. He's from Ohio, as you know. Ohio is the third largest exporting state to Canada, over $20 billion a year. They export to Canada, so we're a huge customer for Ohio. So he's come to a lot of our Canada-US events, and I've chatted with him there. And, I think actually he's somebody who knows Canada well, who's been very important for his state, who is essential to the success economically of his state. So, and we have already, a bit of a relationship built. So that's good.
So there you heard it directly from the horse's mouth. He's someone who knows Canada well. So I think it'll mark a good thing for our trade relationship with Canada and the US. However, of course, I'm more concerned about those aspects of JD showing that he understands Canadian conservatism and that he will be an ally in Canadian conservatism, because we certainly cannot have enough allies with what we're seeing in our country right now. It feels a lot of times like we're losing. Things seems like maybe the tide is turning, and I think voices like JD will be important over the coming years to continue pushing that conservative momentum forward. Now, there's one other interesting little tidbit that I wanted to share with you all. JD was actually friends with Jamil Jivanji in college. They were at Yale together, and Jamil, you guys might remember him. He was a National Post columnist for many years. I actually first got to know him. I saw him kind of come on my profile around that time, but I got to know him a little bit more closely with the work that he did with the Manning Conference. It's been renamed the Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference over the year. It's sort of like the main conservative conference of the year. I'm not sure what the purpose was of the rebrand. Everyone in conservative circles still refers to it as Manning, but he's now gone on. He was elected as the Conservative MP, where Aaron O'Toole used to be the MP. I want to read you a little bit from this column that he wrote in 2020 about his relationship with his close friend JD. Giovanni wrote, quote, "I first met JD Vance during our law school orientation at Yale University a decade ago. We attended a wine and cheese reception. I didn't know so many different kinds of cheese existed, and I had never tasted wine before. Needless to say, I felt out of place. Across the room stood a fellow student who seemed equally unfamiliar with wine and cheese. We went on to develop a strong friendship, forged through moments of shared discomfort over the course of our 3 years in the Ivy League. We were by one another's side for awkward interactions with professors and classmates, life-changing job interviews, and hundreds of hours of studying. We became such good friends that I eventually performed the Bible reading at his wedding." So I think that just paints a really good picture of who JD is. If you can't read that as sort of an average, as I said before, an everyman, as a blue collar worker, as just a regular person, if you can't read this and just come away with a good impression of JD, then I just would assume that you're part of the elite managerial class. They went to this wine and cheese reception. They didn't know about the different kinds of cheese. It's very common. I would be the same. I did think it was funny where he'd said he'd never tasted wine before, because I'm assuming he was at least in his 20s here. So it seems like you would have had wine at some point. And of course, just the last line, we eventually became such good friends that I performed the Bible reading at his wedding. Just wholesome stuff. The type of politics and the type of relationships and the type of people that we need to get back to electing, both in Canada and the US. I think it's also worth talking about why JD was picked as Trump's running mate. Now, there hasn't been any official reports of this, but there's been a lot of speculation online that it was important for Trump to pick someone that would protect him. And what I mean by that is not protecting him physically, but not appointing somebody who was sort of a washed down conservative that, still plays by the media's talking points, is still apologetic for his conservatism, but someone who was more of a populist, someone who was unapologetic. Because if Trump had elected a weak VP, someone like a Tim Scott or Nikki Haley, then it would make sense for another assassination attempt, because then Donald Trump would be out of the way and his choice would be someone with washed down conservatism that the managerial class could sort of run a roughshod over. With JD, we don't see that. I mean, you saw that clip of him that I played for you earlier on CNN. This is someone who really plays by his own rules and does politics his own way. So we talk about the protection of Donald Trump. A lot of people say, with someone like JD, that was a good move for Donald Trump politically, but also just for his own personal safety. When we talk about Trump's protection, It is interesting to see what's gonna happen. You guys, I'm sure, have been following the story of the assassination attempt closely. I think we have more questions than answers at this point as to what exactly went wrong and how that shooter was able to be on the roof. We know that Secret Service had eyes on him. I, for the life of me, cannot understand why the shooter was not shot before he was able to launch 8 rounds into a crowd of American citizens with a former US president speaking. The Secret Service, some reports have said that they have a no-shoot policy. I've never heard of that before. I definitely don't believe it to be true. And even if that was their policy, there was no reason why Donald Trump should have been on that stage. He should not have been allowed on that stage until they were absolutely certain that there was no threat nearby. You've probably seen the other reports saying that Secret Service weren't at that location because of a sloped roof. Like, come on. This is a thing. This is the thing. The ruling class really believes that we are all so dumb and unable to think for ourselves. They honestly think that we're going to believe this, or they think that nothing will happen. They think they can say whatever they want, and even if people groan and complain, they aren't going to lose their positions of power, because that is what we've been seeing in recent years. Case in point, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoking the Emergencies Act. He still has not faced the consequences for those actions. He is still the Prime Minister of Canada. I mean, we can have the discussion about the NDP propping him up there. Just want to quickly touch on the Republican National Convention, which we know took place this week. Donald Trump was confirmed as the not presidential nominee on Monday, as was J.D. confirmed as the vice president for the 2024 presidential bid. There were some other people who spoke. We talked about J.D., but there were some other people who were considered very plausible running mates. One of them was Vivek Ramaswamy. This is someone who, even though he wasn't picked as the VP, has had such an explosive career and has been so successful. He, of course, also ran to be the president. He did not win. We know that that was given to Donald Trump. But this is someone who went from being essentially a nobody to someone that almost everyone knows. He's become a household name because he was so successful in his presidential bid. And I think part of that is because he's so well spoken. And I think he's going to be such an asset for the Republican Party moving forward because of how well spoken he is and how much he understands the issues, and as well how he's able to speak to the young people. I just wanted to play this clip for you of him speaking last night at the RNC, just to get a sense of who he is and how he's going to be just important as a leader for the party moving forward. Take a listen.
But we're not going to win this election just by criticizing the other side. We're going to win this by standing for our own vision of who we really are. What does it mean to be a Republican in the year 2024? What does it mean to be an American in the year 2024? It means we believe in the ideals of 1776. It means we believe in merit, that you get ahead in this country, not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions. It means we believe in the rule of law. And I say this as the kid of legal immigrants to this country. That means your first act of entering this country cannot break the law. That is why we will seal the southern border on day one.
So you can see there, just so eloquent. He fully captures the issues. I would highly recommend that you go back, take a listen to his full speech. It's worth your time. This is someone to keep an eye on in the weeks and years to come. It's seeming like there's some discussion that he might actually seek to take JD's seat as a senator in Ohio. I believe the last reports I saw said that he was waiting to talk to Donald Trump to see if Donald Trump would approve of that move. And I suspect that he will be given the green light to run as a senator in Ohio. So I think just someone to keep a close eye on the years to come. Just want to quickly touch on Donald Trump. You know, we know he was shot in the ear at the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania on Saturday. When he first entered the RNC on Monday, he had a bandage over his ear. We're seeing a lot more security around him. The Secret Service said they didn't need to up security at the RNC because it already had the highest classification of security that any event can receive. But it was funny. There were some videos circulating online over the weekend saying, "Oh, there's all men around him." The one thing I can't get over was the female Secret Service agents. I'm like, if you guys haven't seen these videos, you got to go back and watch them. These women look like they absolutely have no idea what they're doing. And the most shocking thing to me was in those moments after Trump was shot in the ear, when he's standing on stage, you have a female Secret Service agent in front of him. She isn't big enough to cover his body. She's about a head shorter than him. So his head and she actually bent down at one point to pick up his Make America Great Again hat, which I don't know, I don't know if he had asked her to, maybe he thought he was going to trip over, but that seemed like a really dumb move because they didn't actually know at that point that things were secure. And if you listen to Dan Bongino talk on Fox News, he's been covering the Secret Service's failures of the event on Saturday so well. He really says, you know, the main thing to do is to protect the president and to get them out of that location, because you don't know that there's not going to be more than one shooter. The first shots could be a distraction. So I still, we got that great shot. And of course, that will be remembered in American history in days to come. And that's really going to be the picture, the photo of Donald Trump standing with his arm up and blood trickling from his ear, surrounded by Secret Service agents. That will be the moment that comes to define his campaign. But I think there needs to be questions asked about how that shot was even allowed to be taken, that his whole torso and his head was exposed in the seconds after someone had fired 8 rounds at him. And again, it's just, you do have to watch this, and you do have to have fears and concerns from about his security. Obviously, he would know more about the situation than we do. But looking at it all and seeing the Secret Service agents, it just sort of left a sense of unease in me. Despite these women's best efforts, they're just simply not able to do the job properly because they're not big enough. And we know that they also wouldn't be fast enough or strong enough because we believe in biological reality. And we know that men and women are different, even if it's become incredibly controversial to say that is the truth. So Donald Trump, he's at the RNC. There is such high security there. And I just want to play this one clip of him at the RNC looking actually quite emotional. I don't think I've ever seen a single time when Donald Trump looked emotional. But here he is after having survived the assassination attempt. This wasn't his first appearance at the RNC. This was a little later. Take a look at this next clip. I'm sure the scene in the room was just absolutely electric at that moment. And you can see there what I had mentioned, all the male Secret Service agents absolutely flanking the president. So, it'll be interesting to watch where this story takes us in the weeks to come, because as I said, there's so many questions. And it seems with every new thing the Secret Service says, we have more questions than we do answers, like their comment about the slope group. So we will be following that closely in the days and weeks to come. Guys, that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Rachel and the Republic. I will be back next week with more content on the American election for you all. And there's certainly no shortage of stuff to cover. So I'm very curious to see where it will bring us over the next few weeks. I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day and rest of your week. I will see you in a couple days. God bless.